Welcome to the Youthlete Academy podcast, empowering kids to have a lifelong love of physical activity and sport by equipping parents to support their journey. Welcome to the Youthlete Academy podcast number 3. I'm joined by friend, former colleague, and accomplished ultra-marathon athlete Julian Ho. Julian is a 5-time Boston Marathon qualifier, 2-time winner of the Sulphur Springs 100-mile ultra marathon. He's qualified for the 100-mile Ultra Trail du Mont Blanc and many more. In addition to his athletic accomplishments, Julian is a graduate of the University of Western Ontario with a Bachelor of Honors in Kinesiology. He holds countless training certifications and is one of Toronto's most sought-after personal trainers and group fitness instructors. He and I discussed the life athlete concept, applying athletic principles to everyday life, and the crucial role of fundamental movement skills in developing young athletes. His journey to holistic health and ultra endurance, the interconnectedness of fitness, community, and mindset in the growing athlete, and how the influence of role models and parental guidance help shape youth development. Well, welcome back. My guest today, Julian Ho. One of the things that I've recognized, especially training kids these days, is the importance of teaching run mechanics and as a foundational movement pattern. And Julian is an elite runner. Not if you don't know what an ultra marathon is, we'll get to that in a second. But Julian and I, we work together. I really think, he's the first person I can give credit to coining the term a life athlete. Mm-hmm. And I really look at, kids are athletes, adults can be athletes, but from a life athlete perspective, someone, who is training or doing things to be better at life. And that life athlete mantra that Julian coined is something that, the Youthlete Academy embodies, Fuel Training Club embodies. And, I want Julian just go on about his background so you can get to know him a little bit.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Greg. This is incredible what you're doing here with this podcast. And I really appreciate the sentiment words that you just shared about me. Well, my background has begun with a keen interest in kinesiology and an early, identification of my skills and knowledge in movement mechanics, exercise science in high school. It was one of those subjects in high school that came very easy for me: anatomy, biology, physiology. So I went right from high school into university at Western and excelled. I did fantastic, finished with honors, and that led me to part-time working as a personal trainer on campus, training professors and tutors and other people, other staff, which was an odd situation, but very, very fun. And that continued on to a career in coaching, one-on-one group, and consulting. And so as I continued my journey, it was incredible to know that this was my calling, to help people and to do it through movement. I was blessed to learn that early on just by being fortunate with athleticism. Sport came very easy to me, being captains of multiple sports teams in high school and outside of school. And then jumping into the world of running. I ran my first marathon after skipping the half and going from a 10K, Sporting Life 10K, and doing well in that, and then jumping into a marathon and then qualifying for Boston after that first marathon helped me realize that this was something that I was really, really good at. It came from a lot of mindset, self-coaching. As a kid, I grew up with atopic dermatitis. I had autoimmune, and that really taught me a lot about health on a holistic level. It also taught me a lot about how we socialize as kids and as youth and young adults, and how it's tough. It's tough when people look at you and judge you in a certain way because you have red skin and it's irritating. But then I also internally didn't realize that I was pushing at such a level that didn't reveal my fullest potential. I had these weights or baggage of this autoimmune that was very difficult for my parents to understand, and they did the best they could through the world of allopathic medicine. but there's only so much that dermatologists could do for me. They didn't really talk to the internal health and the internal medical approach, speaking to my organs and something as simple as breathing. I was a mouth breather because I was always irritated, allergic. My nasal pathways are always blocked, but yet I was still able to perform at a high level athletically. So when I started to learn more about the holistic through the Czech Institute and the Institute of Motion, these are two schools of kinesiology / movement, it really taught me to reclaim my own health and human performance through nutrition, through sleep, and through mindset. And so I was able to, you could say cure, you can't cure eczema, but you can manage it very, very well. And so once I was able to take care of myself, then the world of ultramarathon birthed. And then I started going further and further. It became easier and easier. And my ability and my vitality grew. So my appetite in my career of fitness and wellness exploded. I was, teaching and performing at such a high level. I did a lot. I had a lot of capacity. And that's something that many people know me for, is that I have a lot of capacity. I can take on a lot. But over time, everyone's human, and my precision focus was still there, but I started to recognize other aspects of life that were necessary beyond myself, like family and friends and my peers. And so I realized how important it was to take that overflow of energy that I had and the abundance, and not just pour it into my own career and my own physical pursuits, but pour it back into the industry and make the industry into more of a community. And so I birthed an organization called 2.0 Toronto. And that's where Greg and I continue to further our relationship, being people who are advocates of I guess, do-gooderness, if that's a word, really trying to give back and push the advancement of the community of fitness, health, and wellness in a more aligned, centered, grounded place, as opposed to a commercialized place, doing it through altruism and giving back to charity. I think these values and virtues we both hold together are really, really important factors that often we lose sight of, especially if we're on an ambitious drive to achieving economic success and financial success and career success. I think that really takes precedence over the why of what we do. So with that, I think that explains a bit more about who I am.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think anyone that's worked with you and who's been trained by you and has run with you will just understands this. And I think getting to the roots of these athletic endeavors, talking about some of the struggles that you had, and then moving into kinesiology. If you could look back at where now as a runner, did your passion as a kid, did it start running or did it start in another sport?
I played the diversity of sports: soccer, basketball, tennis, rugby, baseball, all the sports you can think of. And cross country was one of those sports that was a afterthought at our school. It was a group of misfits. And I remember in grade 9, we had a strike. So we didn't get to play sports. In grade 10, though, when we first started sports, the cross country coach was trying to recruit from other teams, and they had heard that I was a great soccer superstar through just intramurals that we had to keep us satiated with athletics. And so I jumped on the team, and everyone was like, "Whoa, you got Julian on the team!" And so I did really well. Went to OFSA my first year, helped contribute to new records for our school. And it was great while it lasted, but then it still became an afterthought. I never really dove further into it when I was in high school or university. But right out of school, going into my professional career of fitness coaching, I started using running as an integral part of my own personal meditation. And so in doing so, I started with more of a generalist approach to movement, which allowed me to be very adaptable. And I contribute my successes as an ultra marathon because I had such a wide and a very diverse approach to movement. I was able to use those as resources to help me with things like footwork, with pacing, with cadence, with strike patterning, with just athleticism. And that allowed me to take those skills and apply them to running, especially trail running, and do very, very well in this sport.
Right. And I guess, yeah, so soccer, and for you, did you do a lot of structured or organized soccer? Or did you do a lot of unstructured, just play in the park, or even if it were other activities?
It was a combination of the two. During our soccer practice, we played on a rep team outside of high school, and that was very regimented, skills based, drill based. Um, and then outside of that, I did as much pickup soccer as I could. Played with I have a twin brother, so that's another factor to my athletic prowess. Is having a twin is like playing against a mirror. So you're able to compete at a very, very high level with your twin, with your shadow, with your mirror. So that
Right.
really helped keep me consistent every day, playing soccer, playing basketball, playing some sort of sport, running together, playing tennis. So yeah, diversity.
Right. Yeah, that's true. I mean, and I see it where kids that I'm coaching have older siblings. They're just
Mhm.
naturally more aggressive. They have, they've been pushed around by their older sibling, and they know how to deal with these. Whereas, for instance, my son, he's got a younger daughter, and they're about the same size, but she's 2 years younger, and he is not nearly as aggressive as she is. And I know that's a sample of really two there, but feel like that it is an underrated, aside from me loving twin studies to begin with, a good example of having someone that would be your equal,
Mhm.
that's pushing you to get better. So I guess if we fast forward now and look down the road almost where you are right now, like ultra marathons, like that's a for a lot of people, they marathon is a half marathon, even a 10K for some people is an athletic event that someone really has to put training towards and focus. So when was your first ultra, and how did you get into it?
I'd say my first ultra was maybe 3 years after my Boston. So I started going into marathoning, running, and I realized that there was only so much I could put forward to shaving off a couple more minutes to my marathon time. So I thought, how do I continue running but not get obsessive over the numbers? And so I looked into trail, and I realized that trail running was much more difficult than road marathon running. And then I started to get very interested in my duration and my resilience and my endurance, and see how far I can push myself. So maybe about 15, 16 years ago, I did my first ultra. It was the Muskoka Limberlost. It was 56K trail. And after I ran that, my body had never been that broken because my body was so used to running on road. And with the ever changing terrain, the distance, the, the agility required, the mental acuity, the focus of attention, also nutrition, fueling strategies, all that came in and forced me to fall back in love with running, because I had found that I had hit a plateau with my road running, and being in nature was an incredible source of inspiration and a draw. So being outdoors, um, that was my first one, and it was a quick uh, slap in the face, but it also woke me up and it gave me a new hunger to develop new skills in the world of ultra. In the world of ultra, if you want to be welcomed into the club, 100 miles is typically the badge of honor, to be able to run 100 miles in one go, no sleep, is definitely the best. But every ultra marathon race is very different and different from one year to the next, in that the terrain from a race in Europe up in the Alps versus some of the ones that you see in North America, which are a bit more flat, um, very, very different. So, if you're going to super high elevation, um, you're going to have multi-day ultras. And in certain ones, like for example, in May, I'm going to be running Sulphur Springs in Ancaster, Ontario. That's going to take anywhere from 16 to 20 hours. So you can do it within a day.
I think that's, yeah, just to let that sink in. So 100 miles to get your badge, 16 to 20 hours of
That's
straight
four
running. And
marathons.
in those ones, yeah, are you, so some of them I know, and I'm not as familiar, but I know some of them, I guess it just depends on which one it is, but you'll sleep. Are most of the ones that you do just the straight shot ultras, and you might take short rests?
You can take power naps, maybe like 5, 10 minutes. Some people take 20, but there's ultra marathons that are known as multi-day treks. And so you're not really running the whole time. You are most often just trekking, like hiking fast. And so those ones can be expedition based, multi
Hmm.
day. But the ones that I'm currently focusing on are, within one shot. The longest I've done is a 36-hour, from a Friday to a Sunday. And that was called the Fat Dog 120 miler, in the Cascade Mountains in BC, Alberta. So that one was
Yeah, that's
quite a trip.
incredible. So, and you touched on something that I think is really important, is that getting into ultras, it's less about the times and the metrics, so to speak, and you're more connected with nature, and it's something that I know you think about these things that motivate you to run, but that's got to be for you to go out there and do this. It's just, as you said, it's meditative. Is that how you really started to fall in love with it?
Absolutely. Everyone comes to spiritual development in different ways, and running was my way of doing so. It was letting go of quantifying everything, which is what I did with marathon road running, and then shifting to the opposite side of letting go of watches, timers, splits, and forgetting about, you know, the number side of things, and really going into the feeling and the sensing and again the spiritual side of things. And so for me, I was very interested in exploring my mind, seeing where it went. And when you think about sports psychology, that is the playground. Ultra marathon running is how I develop my sports psychology in all the things that I do. And so when you apply it to business, to family, to personal development, there needs to be a playground slash canvas slash laboratory for you to hone those skills. And trail running and ultra marathon running was and continues to be that place for me.
Yeah, that's and I mean, so many people, when we looked, and again, because we're talking about the now and what motivates you, or what you've got to enjoy what you're doing, because a lot of people might look at an ultra marathon and be like, well, that seems torturous, right? But there's so many different reasons why someone might do it, and that's I've never really thought of it. I mean, it makes perfect sense, but I've never really thought of it in that way. So if we come back now, soccer was the first sport, but then you got into cross country, and I see the value in cross country, having helped my kids' school's cross country team. It's really the first opportunity, if you want it to be, for kids to participate in a race, at a young age. There are some other ones out there. There's some of the big 5, 10K races that are in the city might have these kids 800 meters, or kids want 1K. But to have a start line where, you've got butterflies, and, you might only be running a kilometer or so, but it's with your school, and it's against all the other teams. Like, I've seen firsthand how much they enjoy it. At first, you can see them, they're nervous. These kids haven't experienced the nervousness feeling. And I like to, it's fun being around kids having their first experience with something like that, and explaining like that's okay. And I've really seen cross country as a great sort of entrance to all fitness, because everyone who finishes that race, like, you can see them, they're completely exhausted. They've pushed themselves more than they would at school, because they know it's a race. Their parents are cheering for them. And then at the end, you see, it's like the endorphin rush. You see it all happen, and they express their emotions so authentically that they had a great time. They're like, we want to do it again. So I mean, I did cross country, but not at this age. I'm talking about grade ones and twos.
Hmm.
So, seeing cross country, even if you don't end up being a runner, I mean, I still think learning how to run is one of the most important things kids can do. But, your first cross country race, like if you were to go back now, do you remember what it was and how you felt?
It was terrible, but but when you finish it, it was incredible because you don't really see the end line. Some people get into running through track and field, so they know they're running around the track, but cross country, you don't see the finish line. And so it's oftentimes the circumstance and the context in which you are um, experiencing. So it's not the race itself, it's all the things before, all the things that are within that dictates how you approach that race. And so I mentioned when I was young, it was difficult because I had, a skin disease, and that affected. It was an autoimmune, and so, I was arriving at the start line not only with butterflies and nerves, but also an inflamed body and breathing through mouth and things just difficult already. And so I remember getting to my first race and, of course, experiencing having to go to the washroom, but having to hold it in because, the gun's going to go right away. And then you have your twin brother right beside you, and he's not really talking to you, and you're not. And so everyone's kind of focused in their own head. And when the gun goes, everyone sprints. And so the absolute worst strategy, but you finish it and I did pretty well.
Yeah.
And then the finish line and getting the cheer, the applause, and knowing that there's a reward for hard work. It's also something compared to sport, single task. It's one thing, just go to the finish line. You don't have to think about coordination and teamwork and an outside thing like a ball kicking around. So there's a lot to cross country as the first uh, entry into athletic development, and also, again, mindset, sports psychology, self-talk, all these really important things that we need to have as athletes.
Yeah, and you don't think of it, but just as you said, like being able to cope with stress, right? Like that anxiety induced start, is such a good way for kids to get over that feeling and recognize that they can control their emotions, and then to get focused. The gun's about to go, you have to run, and then having that positive experience. So yeah, no, I'm like I encourage all able-bodied kids that if they can, they can do it, and having coached the kids team, you can see, like, especially with it's a group mentality in grade one and grade two, you see your peers doing it. You're like, well, I want to do it too. And some kids naturally gravitate to it more than others. Some might be faster. Some might just not like the way you feel. And I know when I was coaching them, part of the strategy was I mean, I wasn't telling them I want them to get a stitch, but I want them to experience a stitch because kids don't know what stitches are, right? You teach them, open your lungs, breathe a little better, hand over your head. And then they start to do it, and then you start to see them do it. They're playing soccer in the schoolyard, and they're like, "Oh, that's a stitch." I remember being taught how to cope with that. But then also, I think that out of breath, uncomfortable feeling, like it's the first time where you're in an environment where you have to figure out what that means, like and to understand that it's okay to feel like that. And I think it's good first lessons to teach it's okay being uncomfortable. Get comfortable being uncomfortable. So this sort of transitions to the next topic of a beginner's mindset. And one of the things that I see with kids is that they can take on any challenge because they don't feel like they should know how to do it. They don't have an ego. So when they have the stitch or they feel really uncomfortable, they're not embarrassed. They're actually confused. They're like, what is this? So this beginner's mindset, I almost, want to rebrand it to a kid's mindset because it's something that when you don't know any better and you're almost ignorant to all these things, it allows you to be a little bit more open. And I think, part of that cross country and getting into these sports early helps teach these different attributes. So, from you being able to maintain a beginner's mindset your whole life, like I think one of Julian's great characteristics is that he is always open-minded, willing to learn. This is the 2.0 workshops, and now the 3.0 that he's bringing on is promoting just that. Like, how can we better ourselves? Like, For you, what has been one of the keys to maintaining, as as I rebrand it, to the kid's mindset?
Yeah, Shoshin slash beginner's mind, child's mind, kid's mindset is something that I see from my parents. My parents were both artists, musician. My dad musician, my mom a graphic artist, and they would mimic, or sorry, we would mimic their approach to my mom when she went into an arts and crafts store or an interior design store, or even a clothing store. She would observe pieces with fascination. And my dad
Mm-hmm.
would listen to music and we would see him entranced in awe. And seeing that was something that was downloaded within me and embodied within me. So having positive role modeling is critical to, and was critical to how I developed the growth mindset. And so as I continue to manage that, it's that idea of fascination. Also, not trying to jump to find meaning in everything and giving space to just observing, then understanding and unpacking what are the elements of it that draw me to whatever activity it is, so that I can go right to joy in the experience and the feeling and sensing of what that is. So when it comes to how I cultivate that with running, you feel a stitch and your mind can go right away to, oh, maybe I ate too much or I didn't drink enough water. Mind wants to jump there. That's, the frontal cortex wants to jump there. But instead, how do we go to the stitch and listen to it and say, oh, wow, this is fascinating. This is an interesting sensation. Okay, well, maybe I can, it doesn't feel comfortable, but what can I learn from it? And how can I move with it? And how can I be with it? And so we are taught very early on to reactively move away from pain and failure and and either shy away from it, shun it, or immediately get out of it. Well, of course, there's a difference between understanding what pain is that's destructive versus pain that's constructive. And we end up growing when we experience these moments where we're almost marinating in that therapeutic like discomfort. And to be able to teach a kid that is really critical. And so when my parents, again, approaching not only their passions of, of music and fashion and whatnot, but also when they're um, drowned in discomfort and job difficulties and stress, I would notice them speaking about it, talking about it, and being with themselves and not reacting heavily to it. So they almost approach the same level of fascination to the things that they love with their stresses in life. I mean, they're human as well. It didn't always happen, but I think there's a lot of value in teaching kids what you had said is, oh, that's a stitch. Oh, okay. Well, here's how you can work through it, or just be with it for a moment. It's natural. There's no conclusion that you have to jump to right away, and building a relationship to that. And that's what allows me to continue to grow and learn about the difficulties of life. I mean, that's where we learn the most, is things that are the most difficult, the struggles, the obstacles. As I say, obstacles are opportunities. And so when you have these cues, these prompts, and you go into philosophy and you understand, you learn how did we come up with beginner's mind. Well, that's where running was a place for me to learn more, because then I listened to podcasts and books about meditation, about Buddhist practice, about mental study. So yeah, the long answer is I continue to uphold the growth mindset because I'm fascinated with life.
Yeah, and I think right off the bat, when you said your parents, they had this calm demeanor to them. My dad's also a musician, by the way. I don't think we've ever connected on that before, but another time. So the calm demeanor of parents, how they react to adversity, how they interact with each other. these interactions that, and as a kid, you're observing your parents. You're absorbing everything that they do. So how they respond. Is it okay to say, oh, I don't know? I think that's an important thing, especially for parents. And again, I believe that a beginner's mindset can really trigger someone to be like, well, I'm not a beginner. There's this association with beginner and inferiority, right? So I think, kids' mindset can be a little more disarming because it's playful. The idea is it's okay to not know, and kids will pick that up. And if you can maintain that kid's mindset, they're more coachable. They're the ones who in the dressing room and the dugout. They're the ones that are looking you in the eyes, listening to what you're saying, nodding. They're not the ones trying to explain how they didn't do what you just said and how it was someone else. And I mean, they're developing at all different rates, but that I think is an important attribute that kids will pick up from their parents, especially. So you maintain this kid's mindset, and in the long term, you're going to be a better team player. You're going to be, you'll be able to develop without an expiration date, meaning that it's not, once you get to a certain age and you've closed-minded yourself, or you've gotten rid of this mindset, you're like, okay, I already know how to do it. And I think that's so important. What you said, parents, is picking up that energy from them and how they respond. So, if we were to ingrain this trait in youth, I think I just captured it there. Parents are such a pivotal part of it. Coaches, obviously, because as a parent, that sometimes your kid's going to listen to another adult more than they will you. So coaches play a very important role in the community with that. What else do you think kids could do, or what parents could do to help promote that kid's mindset that I've rebranded from the beginner's mindset?
As an educational nerd, the study of education, actions, of course, speak louder than words. So we're talking about modeling. Also, if you're explaining, analogies are incredibly helpful. Metaphors, things that you can do to help relate what growth mindset is. I don't have one off the top of my head, which is funny, but I think actions and analogies are very, very helpful. I mean, I use the idea of mobility and dental hygiene. So how do I explain mobility to someone and flexibility training? Well, think about it as brushing your teeth, but for your joints and your ligaments and tendons and connective tissues. You wouldn't go 2-3 days without brushing your teeth. You don't want cavities and plaque to build up in your teeth, but very parallel to your joints, you would go, a week without working on your mobility and flexibility and connective tissue? Well, you're going to develop arthritis, like cavities and metabolic waste product. It's all going to build up. Things are going to get gluier, stickier, congested. And so if you can explain that in an analogy, not only to adults and then the adults to their kids, that makes sense. It's like, why do we warm up? Well, it's like brushing our teeth, guys. Let's go. Let's get our teeth brushed through our joints. Okay, all right, we're going to do it. So it's ingraining those habits early on. So the timing of which you're sharing that as well, so that they have that focus, I think is very helpful. Not just screaming out, all right, let's growth mindset you, and we're going to talk to you about that in the middle of a game. Well, it has to come to a point where, what you said about calm, when we're in a calm state, when we're in a state where we're ready to absorb, that is really, really critical. Same with parents. When do we meet people? Not just what we say to them, but how we say it and when we say it are really critical. So actions, doing that, modeling that as often as you can. And then when you can hit those moments, those times that are really critical, the analogies really, really help.
Yeah. So, a mindset hygiene approach to it,
absolutely.
Just, teaching kids good sleep hygiene and dental hygiene. Yeah, no, that early and often is definitely, it's something that I reflect on as a parent myself and realize there's more opportunities to be calm in scenarios. But yeah, absolutely. Being able to introduce that early and continually is important. So when we take that beginner's mindset, I talk about coaching, some of the coach skill sets that I think are important. And this is, I find, because now I'm pretty much involved with all of my kids' sports. And I think at this age, you're not interviewing coaches to be like, okay, well, tell me about your philosophies. It's parents volunteering. But at the same time, I think it's important to know, when I see the skill sets of coaches that are great coaches, having that beginner's mindset is important. Having a calm demeanor, being able to communicate at different levels, because not every 7 or 8 or 9 or 10-year-old is developmentally, emotionally at the same level. So being able to change that conversation, and so obviously being a good coach depends on that circumstance. But for you, and I think again another one of your fantastic attributes is being able to connect with just about anyone. And I know a lot of great coaches out there and trainers that work very well with certain personalities or certain individuals, but very few are have this malleable or this almost this approach where they can it's not that they change who they are around each person, but they adjust their approach with the person that they're training. I think good coaches have this characteristic. So, as someone, you've got to be authentic and you want to be genuine with them. And I feel like this is a skill set that you have. So if you were to look into coaches, what are some of the skill sets you're looking for in a good coach? And maybe what are some of the flags?
I like emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence is so key, because when you have those soft skills to meet someone where they are, you can better authentically relate to them. And that comes often with the skill of being vulnerable, sharing first. So there's a certain level of courage there as well. Being able to recognize how someone's feeling. So there's a certain empathetic and compassionate skill set required, especially since coaching is a service. And then another thing is curiosity. What's that driving force to be emotionally intelligent? It's a curiosity factor. I connect with people from all different ages, backgrounds, demographics, and it comes down to just being curious about what their life story is, why they're here, what they want, what their intentions are. And when you can help someone feel seen, heard, understood, valued, and then finally believed in, you've created a bond. You've gone beyond rapport. You've gone beyond connection. You then have a human to human bond. And so a coach that can create that bond fast is incredibly skillful. And that speaks to, forget technical hard skill knowledge. Anyone can rote learn that. We have AI for that. But the human to human skill, the spirit, the soul, technology will not be able to get there. And that is the one, life force energy virtue that I look for in anyone that I connect with and that I engage with, especially coaches that I'm looking to either recruit, mentor, work with. They have to have that X factor as a human being. And oftentimes, if it doesn't come through, then it's about, reading the context and the circumstance. Maybe they do have that, but there's some shielding, guarding, insecurities. So that's where, again, the compassion comes in. So you as a leader have to be able to step into that and be able to understand that person, where they're coming from, and meet them where they are. So emotional intelligence driven by vulnerability and curiosity is the big skill set.
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. Connecting is so important. So, and obviously, when you look at team sports versus individual sports, because you could see, running can be both individual, team, depending on what you're doing. But if we're talking about ultras, you're getting in your own head as far as self-talk for quite a long time, probably listening to quite a few podcasts or whatnot. But from a coach standpoint, what advice have you found from a taking this beginner's mindset approach and looking at some of the coaches and mentors you've had in running? What has really resonated with you that you didn't either figure out yourself or you didn't recognize right away? What are some of the things that good coaches have helped you with in such a long, grueling activity?
Funny thing is, I've been self-coached to the ultramarathon world. Of course, I have mentors from afar, coaches that I admire, and athletes in this world. Um, Oftentimes they are like kids when they're out there running. The ones that are so serious, um, they're on a mission. Maybe they're doing it out of profession, out of a sponsorship. They have to show up for certain reasons. But those that are doing it for joy, for the art and the science of competition with themselves, their respect for nature really shines. It really shines. And when I can balance my competitiveness with just the idea of completion, and um, pick up things about myself that I didn't know of, or old reminders, I think that's the best case, when I can talk myself through things. And again, comes down to a balance of fun. And what fun is defined as is probably not what everyone thinks of when they think of ultramarathon running. But going through the vast array of our emotional spectrum. I sometimes start with super happy-go-lucky rainbows and sunshines, and I'm going to go down into the pain cave and hit those sad and remorseful, regretful emotions, and then come through that. So it is quite an emotional journey. But then there's moments where you get very stoic, and so I'm able to see myself through almost a entire book, and its chapters and all its ups and downs and learnings. So there's a wide array of emotions, of where my mind goes. And I think that in itself is a beautiful artistic piece of, again, my human expression, my human experience. And that's why ultra marathon running is almost infinite with where you can go with it, because the mind is that.
Right. Yeah. No, I think most people won't do it. People who run, if we were to take a sample of size of people who run, are not going to do an ultra marathon. But that's fine. We use that at one end of the spectrum. As you said, there's a physical component of it that you need to have. It's grueling, but the emotional, I think, for a lot of people is probably the most intimidating part of this. And if we put that aside and we just break it down to running, because obviously someone who's doing an ultra probably really loves running, or at least did before they started doing ultras. But in either event, I see in the long-term development, of athleticism for life athletes. So not everyone's going to be a runner later on in life, but I feel that everyone should learn how to run early in life, so that if you choose not to be a runner later in life, it's not because you aren't able to, because you did not develop the technique, you didn't build up the stamina or the work capacity. Obviously if you're able-bodied, and I see this as such a foundational important thing to teach youth. So being an ultra runner and looking back from when you started with soccer, moving into cross country, kinesiology, becoming a personal trainer, what would you teach kids, or just anyone getting into running? What are some of the foundational approaches to running that you would want someone to first learn, so that as a life athlete, if they chose to, they were able to run if they wanted to?
Wow, that's hard to take all of the things and bring it into a very um, concise, potent piece. I think that okay, so the approach is very holistic, and knowing that that's the route is the approach. I think if we could teach that it's not just one thing, it's multiple things, I think that is one of the first steps and priorities, to not just isolate one thing. And that one thing would be the holistic approach. Um, so speaking to, let's say, psychology, you've got mental toughness and um, focus, and having a beginner's mind, child's mind, kid's mind. Those are very, very key. Um, when you talk about nutrition and physiology, you're talking about your energy and being able to fuel pre and during and post is really, really key, because that's what allows someone who's experiencing the ultra to have more of a balanced mindset. Because when we are deprived of blood sugar, for example, our mind is going to go to these irritable places. The mind's going to want to stop. The body's going to break down. So being able to fuel and also hydrate properly. Physical training is key, because that it builds the body, the physical, to handle the external stresses. And of course, the mechanics development. And then you got the emotional side of things, emotional, social, spiritual, having fun, joy, making it an experience that's long lasting and not just a one-off. How do we keep people curious and vulnerable and okay with hitting the downs, the lows, because that's where we learn most about from life. And then being aware of your environment, respecting nature, and having appreciation that the trail didn't just come out of nowhere. Other people took care of the planet to allow us to run outside in trails, in nature, and breathe fresh air. So it's hard to nail down one thing, but if I were to say, if any coaches were out there wanting to bring their kids or their students to the world of running, it's got to be a holistic approach. You have to hit it at many different angles and create what we talk about, a framework to continue to manage the sustainability of that. And that'll help prevent injuries. It'll keep the sport of running fulfilling, and it'll continue to teach and bring meaning and purpose to one's life. So yeah, that's sort of where I would go, is that
No,
holistic.
that's, I think a lot of the time, and people think, well, if I'm going to prevent injury, I need to learn how to run properly. But as you said, you overlook the holistic aspect to it. If you don't enjoy running and you go out and you've got a bad mindset towards it, and let's say you're doing more volume, or you're just not nourished correctly, you have a bad experience, and all of these things can lead to detrimental outcomes, and it could be mutually exclusive from catastrophic gait, but the overuse injuries and being a ticking time bomb because you haven't enjoyed running and you feel like it's a chore, like that's an important part. So yeah, I think, tying that back in with kids, especially, don't force them to run if they're not ready to do it. Otherwise, this is just going to contribute to a negative association, as opposed to enjoyment. So, I think too, I've seen it firsthand. Parents getting involved, they don't need to do the exact same workout that their kids are doing, but when you model what you want your kids to be doing and do it with them, then it feels more natural. It normalizes it. If you work out around your kids, then all of a sudden it's normal for mom and dad to be working out. It's not, what is this place? And I see it when people come in to the gym, when kids come into the gym for the first time, they're looking around and they're like, wow, these weights, these treadmills, for the first time. But after 3-4 times they've been in there, it's sort of like, I'm going straight to the curve. I want to go run on the curve. I want to pick up this medicine ball. I want to, they begin to associate, well, these are fun activities that I can do in here. And this is now a normal experience. So if, you see your parents doing it and you normalize it and you do it with them, this is an opportunity for kids to really have that positive association. So, wrapping things up here, and I like to ask all my guests on here, because I think this is always something that I reflect on, is if you were to change anything during your developmental phase, what might that be? And recognizing that there might not be anything that you need to change, but it's always, kind of fun to look back where you are now, being an accomplished ultra runner, and thinking, well, what would I do differently if I could?
Maybe I can tie this to the previous about positive role modeling. I would say that any parents that are listening, don't have to be a competitive athlete or a gym goer to create a positive influence on your kids' development in sport or whatever physical pursuit they wish to endeavor. My parents weren't that athletic. They didn't work out with me. But what they did was they supported, and they found the right people to support me. and they found the right role models for me, and they delegated. They didn't detach, but they delegated because they knew they weren't the best people for that role for my brother and I. So I know that they spoke probably one-on-one to my gym teachers, and my coaches, and spoke to them in a way that helped them understand more of who I was and what I needed. And I think that extra effort made a big difference, because then you're being seen, heard, understood, valued, not just with parents, not just that one way. You have many people. And so when we say it takes a tribe, I think that I benefited from that. And my parents did all that they could to help with, my autoimmune when I was younger. They brought me to all different kinds of doctors, naturopath. They tried everything, and I saw that, it was an interdisciplinary, and a diverse tribe of care that allowed me to feel the support from many angles. And so that would be something that I would really nudge parents to think about, is what does that circle of care look like, and that support system from not just the parents, but from everyone that interacts with their kids.
Yeah, no, that's, the parents' involvement is so critical, or role models, or whoever that is, and even if they're not physically participating, it's just the support behind it. Well, yeah, no, that's great. I think it's always, especially speaking with athletes who perform at a high level, and looking at their unique journey, right? I think it's important because a lot of parents like to model, or at least, and I've said this, parents always have the best intentions for their kids. So whatever decisions they're making, better informed, helps make better educated decisions. And I think one of the traps that some parents can fall in is they look at elite athletes and follow their path as the path that their kids should follow. And just hearing your story on its uniqueness, and really everyone that I've spoken to about that story, from getting into sports to an elite level, is always great to hear the different path, multi-skill, broad skill set, multi-sport. So yeah, it's been great catching up with you on this, and it's nice because I learned, these are conversations, that we didn't have in person, about, hearing you open up about a kid and being an elite soccer player. So yeah, thanks for your time. It's been great catching up, and yeah, have to see each other soon.
All right. Well, thanks, Greg, for having me, and best of luck to everyone at the Youthlete Academy.
All right. Thanks, Julian. Thanks for listening in to my conversation with Julian Ho. For any questions on where you can get in contact with Julian, see the show notes below. If you wanted to share this with a friend, it'd be greatly appreciated. You can subscribe to the RSS on this feed, or even through the video on YouTube. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below so that we can engage in future conversations.